we're human beings too.
Yeah.
We're, just because we put on a uniform and a piece of tin that says police on it,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't make us not human, right? She doesn't even know he's been on the run for years for having done terrible things to young women back in the day.
Welcome back to Internal Affairs, a police podcast here with the IA guy. Another special guest, all the way from Northern California. Sam Miceli stopped by the studio to tell us a very, I wouldn't say it's just interesting, it's actually some lessons learned as it relates to his IA story that involves Sam when he was a young cop responding to a help call. And so, believe it or not, there's going to be a lot of lessons learned. It's going to be a real good conversation that we're going to have. And can't wait to have him on, man. So let's get the party started and get going. Stand by. Okay, Code 6 with Sam. Hey, bro. Thanks for coming, bro.
Thanks for having me, Marlon. It's a pleasure. I'm thankful. I'm honored to be sitting here. It's still a little crazy that I'm here, but I appreciate you inviting me, and thanks again.
You know, one of the well, of course, we got to thank Scott.
Yeah,
for this one.
For many things.
You're right, for many things. For I suppose our common ground would be for him mentoring you when you were a young officer, and for him mentoring me and hiring me to teach this internal affairs stuff, which, by the way, it was one of those situations where I was teaching all of 2023, and it just dawned on me, all these conversations we're having, we got to put them on a social platform. Yeah. So, and you can agree to this, is that we don't necessarily talk about this kind of stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of a taboo topic. I would say it's something even the public is probably interested in. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that we pull the veil down on, and we're as cops we're real good at pulling that veil down and not letting people in. Yeah. But then sometimes we also say things like, "Oh, the public will never understand." It's like, well, we have to give them an avenue to understand. Yeah. Right. So this is that avenue, and having these conversations is how we let the public in a little bit.
Yeah. And then on the other side of the coin would be the thin blue line.
Yeah.
We're one big happy family.
We'll talk about that family.
Until, things start going downhill. The first segment, if you will, of the episode I got to ask you is, what is your impression of internal affairs? Meaning, you came on in 2012, and here you are in the academy. Did anybody walk in during your academy and say, "Hey, we're internal affairs, let me tell you what our functions are"? Or were you on probation and maybe your FTOs kind of told you, "Hey, stay away from those guys"? Talk to me, man. What happened back in 2012? What was your impression of internal affairs, if any?
Yeah. I don't remember, and I'm not willing to say there was not a portion of the academy dedicated in some way to IA, but I didn't leave with any sort of knowledgeable, lasting impression of what the actual process might look like, what my rights were, POBAR, things like that. Yeah. What I did leave with, and it's funny because looking back 12 years now, I probably feel the same way now. What I did leave with was the sort of overall sentiment that the IA process is used for very serious things. And looking back, it's not always the case now, but in my opinion, right, which doesn't have to mean much, but in my opinion, it probably should be reserved for those really serious things that even us as cops would want investigated.
Spot on with the response. I can tell you it is used for many reasons, and we'll get into that. And I suppose you're not all alone in terms that you didn't know whether in the academy someone came in and tell you about IA. I can tell you right now, 25, almost 26 years ago when I was in the academy, and here's the deal about the academy. I think we're all just kind of getting our learning domains done, and we just want to graduate.
Yep.
So even if they came in, we probably weren't even paying attention. With that being said, I don't think there's a block, not even a 2-hour block minimum, to kind of explain to you hey, look, this is internal affairs.
Yeah.
It should be used for serious matters. And let me kind of explain you the process, and here you need to know about your Peace Officer's Bill of Rights. But we don't. I don't think we do a good job, which is probably one of the reasons why the stigma, negative that is, has been around for decades,
Yep.
If you were in a room full of sergeants, this is another question of this segment that I have is, here you are, you're in a room full of sergeants, and they're getting ready to begin their assignment in internal affairs. What's the one thing that you want them to know about the job?
I would encourage them that when some sort of notification comes across their desk that perhaps a complaint or some other vehicle for investigating an officer, I think I would ask them to ask themselves, is the IA process, the formal IA process of notifying an officer with a charge sheet, if you will, and affording them an opportunity to a lawyer and all this, the IA process is a giant vehicle. I would ask them if that's the appropriate resource for what is occurring, right? Whatever that piece of paper says, hey, complaint, Joe Schmo says this officer did this. Should we go full bore IA on this? Is this something that we need to go like pedal to the metal? The answer could be yes, right? And I think that's worth stating too, right? And I don't want your your civilian audience to think, we don't want cops investigated. I think every good cop wants their own police officers investigated when that situation warrants it.
No, absolutely. Do you think there's a difference when you say pedal to the metal between a public complaint or an internal complaint?
Yeah, I do. And the distinction I would make is that there's an aggrieved party, so to speak, right? Yeah. Somebody out in the public, you're a lawyer, you'll appreciate the aggrieved party, right? You didn't know I was bringing that to the table.
No, I like that.
Yeah, so in the public, right? If I'm an officer out on the street and I'm working and I do something to a member of the public, right, a citizen of our free world, and it offends them, it perturbs them in some way, and that complaint comes in, and the agency should look at it simply because the complaint has arrived from somewhere else, right?
Absolutely.
We should at least look at it. I'm not saying it has to go anywhere because the investigation will be done or an inquiry will be done, but they should look. Internally is different. The internal process, we may have mandatory reviews for things like OIIs, major incidents, or pursuits where we have to look, but I'm not sure we should go fishing for violations when there's no aggrieved party, because you might ask yourself, what are we getting out of this? Besides potentially a demoralized employee, and a whole bunch of resources maybe dedicated towards something when they could be elsewhere.
Yeah, and from a public's lens, absolutely. I don't think you and I could, well, not just you and I, but I think we can all agree that we don't want our community members out there thinking that, we're just some horrible people and pulling people over and being rude and disrespectful, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, everything should be looked at with a fine-tooth comb. I'm all with that. As far as internal, just from my experience, I don't think we should be going pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
There is an aggrieved party, but it could be venting.
Yeah.
People throw the big words harassment, hostile working environment. They throw I felt like I was being discriminated. And what ends up happening is that when we hear those words, we as a department get like, so, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. So we're just going to go pedal to the metal. And I don't think that should be the case.
Yeah. I think sometimes, whether it's internal or not, the police sometimes will do things that must be reviewed, whether it's department initiated or a public complaint. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies, right? And we do things that we shouldn't. That's the simple truth of it. We strive for perfection, but that's not achievable, right? And the police will make mistakes because we're human beings and we have human performance limitations. And sometimes that amounts to incidents needing to be looked into. That's absolutely a fact.
Let me ask you this, Sam. Traits, characteristics, or to prepare for a job as an internal affairs, what do you think that looks like?
I don't know if this will be a popular answer, Marlon, but I think if I'm being honest, somebody that's been through the IA process, and just for your civilian audience, I don't mean the guy who went out and got in a DUI crash and maybe that guy needs to be on patrol for a while, right? I mean somebody that's gone through the process, either at a low level where we can forgive some things, right?
Yeah.
Or has sort of been through the ringer when maybe it wasn't warranted, and he or she knows what that looks like.
Yeah.
So that when they slide into that spot, they know what's worth pursuing or what this process should be used for. They remember what it felt like when they were in it. And all that boils down to is experience, right? And that's in any job field.
Yeah.
Do you want somebody with experience or not? And I think if you ask any employer, you want somebody with experience. And sometimes somebody who hasn't been through the IA process doesn't know what it feels like to get handed that notice. Like your own family is, alleging that you've done maybe serious misconduct.
That blue line.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting to know that you're one of not many. I've asked this to a couple of my guests lately, and they always go with the answer of, integrity, make sure they're hardworking, have ethics. That's all fine and dandy.
Yeah.
And when I do teach at Savage Training Group, our internal affairs course, in a room full of 30 students, you'll get maybe one or two sergeants who'll say something on the lines like, hey, someone that's been through it.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is, and we talked about this, where the process and the way you're treated turns out to be the form of punishment.
Yeah.
And that goes with even if it comes back sustained, you did something, and you're like, okay, I'm going to hold myself accountable. I know I did something wrong. I messed up. I f***ed up. I got it.
Yeah.
But the anticipation, waiting for that penalty,
Oh yeah.
and how that moments of some will say it's very dark, and some won't. But for the most part, you're right. When you get handed light, it's like that oh shit moment.
Yeah.
Especially after 5-6 years of you doing great work.
Yeah.
You get along with everybody. You're getting some good police work done, getting bad people out of the streets.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you get handed that IA, and you're like, whoa, it doesn't feel all that well.
Yeah, especially when your heart's in the right place as the officer, right? You were well-intentioned. It was a mistake of the heart, if you will, and not a mistake of the mind.
Yep.
And you didn't plan ahead to purposely be nefarious or act shady.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're not great at that either, at asking ourselves, was this a mistake of the heart, or did this officer plan on doing something that was improper, immoral, against policy, illegal even? But if this is a guy or a girl, especially if they're newer in their career and trying to navigate this extremely complex, ever-evolving career path that we all choose, we have to ask ourselves those questions. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the officer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Hey, one last question before we move into trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the job of internal affairs is to protect cops?
No, I don't. I think like any investigation, like when I was in our detective bureau, the only thing I wanted to know is what happened and the truth, as close to the truth as I could find out. And I sort of see that as the IA process as well. If I was the investigator, I'm not looking to protect a cop, and the public needs to know that. I'm also not looking to get a cop, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think you should be dispassionate and remove yourself from those emotional attachments to the investigation, and just seek the truth and let the evidence speak for itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say dispassionate is a way of handling this particular assignment, but you'd be surprised, man. A lot of people don't, including me. I mean, I know when I got to IA, I was like, what?
Yeah.
Jeff did this? Oh, I can see him doing that.
Yeah.
Or there's just no way Jeff would do something like that.
Yeah.
And we got to work on that.
Absolutely.
We definitely do. Trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
12 years. FTO, did some plainclothes assignments. Let me ask you this, because you still got a nice, full, long career ahead of you. What's one job that you would like to do or you wish to do that it's been on your mind, like, man, I really wanted that assignment?
Yeah. If I'm being honest, I really just have this knack for stolen vehicle stuff. So I could, a stolen vehicle task force agent would be, and we do have one in our county, and right now our agency doesn't have a spot slotted for that particular task force, but when it opens, unless I promote before then,
you're all in.
You'll see an application from me, right? I'm not saying I'll get it, right?
Right.
I work with stellar people at our agency. I'm very blessed to work with the coworkers I have. But something about stolen vehicle stuff, and you alluded earlier that I had a plainclothes assignment, and I did, and part of the stuff we did was stolen vehicles. So it's not like I didn't do that job, but if that was my only job and all I did is go around and look for stolen vehicles, I'd be a happy guy.
is in terms of stolen vehicles,
Yeah.
chop shops.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I still get excited when I just look at one and find one out on the streets, if I'm being honest. I think it's because you don't know what's going to be inside the vehicle. You don't know who the crook is going to be. You don't know what other crimes are in that vehicle in terms of narcotics or, credit card theft and fraud. And I mean, it's like opening a treasure chest when you crack the door after the guy's in custody and you're like, let's see what's behind door number 1 in this stolen vehicle. It
That's
could
right.
be anything.
Code 37 vehicles. Show me Code 37 vehicle. Send me a backup in an air unit.
There you go.
Requesting a backup in an air unit. And we used to play license plate lotto is what we used to call it. So back in my days, we used to just run plates.
Sure.
And just keep running. I suppose now it's a little different because we have, what do they call
LPRs.
that? Yeah, LPRs,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of sophisticated
Yeah.
stuff. Would you say, and I'm going a little bit off track
Sure.
here. Is it more, I shouldn't say easier.
Yeah.
Is it more sophisticated to catch someone in a stolen vehicle now, 2024, than it was back in 2004?
Yeah, we definitely have. We're leveraging technology, right? We do have cameras everywhere. The public sometimes thinks it's Big Brother stuff, having cameras everywhere. That's not true, right? When the camera scans your plate, doesn't tell us anything about you or who owns the car or anything. It just compares the plate number to a known hot list, and if there's
Matches.
a comparison, if it matches, then we're off to the races to try and find this car in the area of the cameras, right? So we don't know any personal information, but it does tell us if the car's stolen or if it's a felony vehicle or something like that. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, the technology is very helpful.
Yeah.
Does it sort of cheapen you honing your craft a little bit and knowing which plates to run and stuff like that? Sure, it does.
Yeah.
It's guys coming onto the job now that can rely on those LPR cameras, right? And even me relying on them now, it's extremely helpful.
Oh,
right?
no,
It
totally.
is.
No, I wish we had the LPR cameras back then. It would be
Exactly,
much
right?
easier
Yeah.
because you're sitting there running and running,
yeah.
and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And then you leave a whole shift like, dude, we couldn't find it because that I got to tell you, that was the excitement for us, is running plates.
It still feels better when you find it yourself.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, look, I appreciate you coming in to talk about this IA that you got, and it involves you responding to a help call. Look, I'll set it all up to say that, and I'll leave the floor up to you to get into details about it. But in having our conversations, I think it's important to know not so much that you had an IA, it more along the lines just like, how do you handle something like this? And so I'll leave the floor up to you, man. Tell me what happened, man.
Yeah. So it was nighttime hours, and I was working in the downtown area, and probably one of my closest friends on the department at the time, and that's important for context because emotions play into things.
Of course.
Right? So he's out and about, and he runs a plate on a vehicle, and it comes back stolen, right? And I just told you that's my thing, so I'm all excited. I'm on the eastern side of the downtown district. I don't recall it being very crowded or anything like that. It's kind of like a slow night at my first agency. And so the plate return comes back stolen. He's like, okay, I'm behind it, right? We're going this way. He's kind of setting up the context, getting everybody vectored in to help him, right? The vehicle tries to grab a parking lot, which is kind of like classic suspect behavior. Like, I'll just grab this parking lot and we'll see if the cop goes right by, or let's see if
He's not
going to
see me.
and I'll know what's up based on what the cop does,
Yeah.
right? So he grabs a parking lot, and it's kind of like a wraparound parking lot. So suspect goes in one direction. My partner, for whatever reason, in his decision-making process, goes through the other thing. So they end up coming kind of head-to-head. And so they put out the stop. Another officer is in the parking lot with him. So there are two officers and a suspect. Lights go on, siren goes on. Suspect's head-on with him now, and suspect decides he's going to flee. So as you can imagine, all this stuff's rapidly evolving. So as the suspect is basically deciding, I'm going to drive head-on right at this officer and basically ram him, my buddy is processing that, but is already kind of committed to getting out of the vehicle in order to conduct a high-risk stop,
Right.
Firearms out, that kind of thing, so we can mitigate all that danger. And once my partner is up and standing in the crook of his driver's door, he's like, oh my goodness, I'm about to be rammed. So he's got to literally jump. He can't take his time and step back into the vehicle. He has to dive back into his patrol car in order for the suspect not to hit his driver's door and basically, have the door close on his legs and lower body. So, I mean, and at speeds, like ramming speed, so to speak, I mean, that's like serious damage that can happen to the officer,
I mean,
obviously.
what other options do you have?
Exactly. So he couldn't go this way for like terrain reasons, so he had to go back into his own patrol car. So he jumps back into his car. The door does get rammed, shuts the door basically on the officer. And the fill officer, or the cover, or the backup officer, basically puts out some radio traffic, and it's excited. He's yelling. He's like, 245 on an officer. That basically means assault for your civilian audience. Assault with a deadly weapon on the officer. The weapon being the vehicle.
Right.
So they're yelling code 3 fills, code 3 fills. For us up in NorCal, that just means send me units code 3 as fast as possible. Emergency, emergency response. So everybody starts flying that way, including myself. And I'm thinking, is my buddy hurt? First of all, that's my buddy, right? They're all my buddies, but this is my buddy.
Got it.
Is he hurt? How badly is he hurt, right? Where's the suspect? All these things, because now we have a mobile problem, right? A static problem is already bad enough. Now a mobile problem is worse. So an officer just so happens, a training car happens to fall right back in behind this guy. Now that we have violent felony wants, we can pursue this guy. So a vehicle pursuit ensues. Obviously, in my rookie years, right, anything that happens that's, exciting is more exciting when you're a rookie before you kind of get tempered and stuff like that, right? So, I'm already excited. Now the pursuit cracks off. Now I'm really excited. So I start heading downtown. My code 3 lights are on, right, which, absolve me of the rules of the road, if you will. Still having to obviously drive with due regard for the public.
That's right. Rules of the road.
Yeah, without wanting disregard and all that good stuff. So I'm heading down this downtown street. It's important to know that the city I worked in is a very slow city, right? So more often than not, you're not seeing a speed limit over 25 miles per hour in the entire city. And it probably peaks at 40, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
I was probably, I'm willing to say 70, 75. I'm not proud of that number, but that's probably the number that is in play, right?
Mach 5.
Sure, Mach 5. It's
Mach
not
5.
Mach 8, but it's Mach 5.
We're there.
So I'm going fast. The officer ends up being okay. The pursuit goes all the way through the city. The crook takes us on a ride. And I think he crashes into a liquor store on the south side of town. The airship's overhead. I don't remember if it was a foot bail out of the car and the suspect's running on foot now, but eventually we get this guy into custody, right? So the call kind of stabilizes, right? Everyone high fives after, right? Hey, pursuit, officer's okay, everything's good. I didn't crash my car. I didn't almost hit anybody. Nobody, to my knowledge, complained about the driving or anything like that. And so, man, I thought it was just a fun night, right?
Right.
My first agency it's not a sleepy agency, but it's sleepier than the one I'm at now. So even in this smaller agency, that was a pretty cool call, right?
Yeah.
Especially, like I said, rookie years.
Yeah.
That's a good night for us, right?
Of course.
Especially with bad guy in custody. So, a couple weeks later, after this thing, is completely over with and the DAs are happy with the case and everything, I get into work and I take a peek in my department mailbox, right? And there's a manila envelope. And I'm like, that's one of two things, right? It's either like a training certificate or it's you did something wrong certificate, right? It was the latter.
It was a ladder. I was going to say it was a ladder.
Yeah, it was the latter. And it was basically allegations of, unsafe driving. And I don't remember if there are any actual vehicle code sections listed or if it was just internal policy numbers, but 3 or 4 allegations. You need to meet with, 2 investigators. I forget what their names are, and I wouldn't name them anyways, right? But you need to be here for your IA interview on this day, and it's the first one I've ever seen of these, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness, am I remembering this call wrong? Maybe somebody complained. Somebody had to have complained. We'll figure this out. Somebody thought I was driving like a jerk. We'll figure out, my lights were on, check. And I was...
I didn't hit anybody, check.
Yeah, didn't crash my car,
Didn't
check.
crash,
But, it's probably fair that a member of the public didn't know the context of what was happening.
Yeah.
And even with the lights going, they're like, what's this jerk doing, maybe, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of where my head was at. Turns out that wasn't the case, right? I found that out later during the process itself. But yeah, there was also an allegation of not notifying the communication center that I was responding in a code 3 manner, right? That's probably one to this day that I'll sort of just fall on the sword on and say, yeah, I did that, and here's why, and I still stand by that decision. And I don't really have any emotions attached to it. It's just I still today think that was the right call. It was done on purpose. But yeah, that was kind of my introduction to here's your paperwork.
Here's IA.
Get ready for what's next, right? Yeah, and then you go through the process itself.
Wow. Okay. So, well, I got a couple questions.
Yeah.
So, in terms of some lessons learned, yeah, I suppose you can notify dispatch that you are responding code 3 because normally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you do get assigned some incidents, right, by dispatch. Well, they'll actually tell you to go code 3.
Different up in NorCal, Marlon. Okay. It's a SoCal thing for the dispatch center to send you somewhere code 3.
Correct.
That's not the comm center's decision in NorCal.
Oh, wow.
That's the officer's decision.
Right.
Or a supervisor getting on the air saying you can respond
On code 3. Or you can request.
So at our agency or both agencies that I've worked for, it's here's the call you're sent to.
Yeah.
You're a big boy. You're a police officer. You're wearing a gun on your hip.
I like that.
And you decide, hey, I'm responding code 3. That's how it goes, or you don't, right?
Right.
But it's up to you. And then, there's supervisors that are monitoring the channel, and if there are 9 units going code 3, they might say, hey, only 3 units code 3, because they don't want a bunch of cops crashing into each other, right? So, clearing lights and stuff.
I'll ask you this question in a different form.
Sure.
As you sit here today and reflect on this incident, what penalty would you have given yourself?
For this whole thing?
Yes.
Okay, well, this is going to anyone that doesn't know me or you and why we're here, it's going to come off as very biased, right? Obviously. But I think this was a good opportunity to mentor a young rookie officer and tell the officer, hey, we appreciate your enthusiasm. Your partner, your friend in your personal life needed your help. We would rather you drive fast than be the guy who maybe does a couple laps around the block because they don't want to be the first one there. Those cops exist.
Yeah.
We'd rather you do what you did, but that having been said, we need to have another conversation maybe about how fast you were going. And, you can still have a and tough isn't even the right word.
Yeah.
You can still have a meaningful conversation with your employee, mentor them without throwing the full heavy weight of an IA process on them. And then at the end of this process for me, after having gone through a very stressful process, right? The first one is always more stressful, but it also ended with, if I remember, 2 days on the beach. I was suspended 2 days. And I remember thinking, and this is going to sound arrogant, and I'll admit that, but I remember thinking as the investigator was questioning me and raising their voice towards me and this kind of stuff, I remember thinking, if this guy, as big a jerk, honestly, as he's being right now, if this happened to him tonight, I'd drive fast to help him.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that. So, and I don't know if that's the right thing to think, right? I'm being honest with you. So yeah, I think this is a good time to grab your employee, bring them in the office, and not completely demoralize them, but have a hard conversation with them, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that you're being biased. I would put my pension check, which is kind of decent, because as a matter of fact, I think it just went up
Nice.
another 0.4% on top of the 5-point-something%.
Can't wait.
Yes, it's good, but I'm willing to put my pension check to say that if I were to line up 20 police officers and ask them the same question that I just asked you, under the same and similar circumstances, they'll probably choose verbal counseling. You can go on your file and say, you've been counseled.
Yep.
Oftentimes we miss that opportunity to have that mentoring session.
Yeah.
And we just go pedal to the metal and give suspension and treat you as if what you did was kind of like a felony in this department. And I don't necessarily, me personally, and just getting to know you, I think we missed the beat on this one in a sense that that could be it. But then again, this is why we're having these conversations, and hopefully who's ever watching and listening, and you are that sergeant, in an agency where, by the way, it has, and this is true, it has more of an impact on a smaller agency than it does on a real big agency like mine, for example. An LAPD, you have over 8,000 employees today. Back in my days, I think at one point we had 10,200.
Wow.
So you can imagine
Yeah.
if someone responded to a help call,
Yep.
balls to the wall. But here's the deal. There's over 23 different divisions in LAPD. I can tell you just from experience that if it happened in one division, it could have been a verbal counseling. And then in another side of the division, it could have been 2-day suspension and just ridicule you. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Look, is there, I got to ask you, how long did this process take? How long were you on this holding pattern, if you will?
It was, it's a smaller agency, right? So there, there wasn't a ton of these going on at the same time, right? So I'm willing to say months, which is honestly on the shorter end of things, because investigations can take up to a year and all that kind of stuff, right? So
yes,
months, definitely.
But those months felt like probably years.
Yeah.
I mean, one day probably feels like 6 months.
Yeah, and you might imagine that as a young, proactive officer who got into police work to, sort of like the age-old, I want to take bad guys to jail, right? You could imagine what I was doing in those months, right? I was probably doing a lot less proactivity. I may have been demoralized, and I'm not getting on a soapbox here, but it doesn't feel great when your employer, to this extent, tells you, like, hey, you did an awful job, right? And it's like, man, I thought I did the right thing. It really felt like I was doing the right thing to drive fast and help my friend. And again, I'm just being honest, that's how I felt. I'm not saying that's what's right.
No, totally.
But that's how I felt. So I don't remember specifically, but I'm sure I was doing less proactive police work during this IA process. And at a small agency, you brought up a good point, small versus large, but I think sometimes agencies in general, or IA investigators specifically, forget that when it's almost the same thing for something to happen to you versus your close friend, because I'm just as demoralized when I see something happen to a good friend at work that I feel is unfair, let's say.
Right.
And so now, not only is he demoralized maybe, or, kind of feeling down because he's going through the process,
Absolutely.
but I'm watching my buddy get taken down, so to speak, right? And that doesn't make me feel good either. And you might imagine how quickly that becomes pervasive at a small agency. And now you have what some people will say is a morale issue, right? And I guess ultimately it could be a morale issue, but it's kind of a leadership issue as well.
100% spot on, last nail in the coffin. Bam. Meaning it's a culture and a leadership issue. Because here's the deal. You get something minor like that. Let's just even go with, I don't know, violation of policy.
Sure.
And you get brought into the office, and here you are getting demoralized, like you have mentioned. Everybody's going to know.
Yeah.
So then what happens is to the other officers, well, I don't want to do.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to what he went through, right? Those are the young ones. But what about the tenured officers? Or even the old school guys, the senior guys have 20, 30 years on.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, could have been that if they experienced the same incident that you did, chances are they probably would have gotten a different type of penalty and treatment.
Potentially, yeah.
And so those are several reasons why we decided to do this podcast, is because you don't get to have these conversations where if you're out there listening and watching, there could be that situation where, you know what, we're not good at emotions. I think we're always saying facts.
Sure.
Facts, give me facts. That's fine. But let's take in consideration how this is going to impact the morale of the department. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. We work against ourselves sometimes, right? So you hear it's kind of like a saying in our career that, we eat ourselves. Like, if we got nothing else to do, we eat our own. And we start going and looking for things that don't need looking for. It's different than something being brought to our attention. I think sometimes too, policies, you brought up policy earlier, policies are a big deal too, because a lot of agencies have gone from general orders to policies. And there's a large policy company that I won't name that you can probably think of. that is pervasive throughout, I mean, tons and tons of police agencies. I'm willing to say worldwide at this point, probably. And that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that organization is made up of a lot of lawyers. And I got nothing against lawyers and people who went to law school, Marlon. I love lawyers. But they think a certain way, right? And so you could go from a paragraph general order on maybe a foot pursuit. Like, what should an officer do during a foot pursuit? And then you go to a policy that's written by lawyers, and that's a 10-page policy.
Yeah.
And the lawyers, I'm sure, and maybe even the agency or the city, by subscribing to this new policy that's more complex and lengthy, is probably thinking we're mitigating a lot of liability with this long, lengthy policy. And they're not wrong, but there's another side to that coin where it becomes a long list of things an officer can do wrong, right? And that not only can that play a part internally, but now instead of a paragraph, more generic, do the right thing, be reasonable, general order, there's a be perfect policy, right? So the old GOs, if you remember reading those, like, they give off a vibe of the police need to be reasonable. They're humans, we know that, be reasonable. You read these new policies that are 10, 12 pages long, if not longer, Marlon, and it says be perfect. And that is unachievable. And now you're in a federal lawsuit for whatever reason, because in this country, anyone can sue anybody, right? And now you're in a federal lawsuit, and guess what the plaintiff's attorney is looking at? A 12-page policy full of things that you've done wrong, right? So it's just, sometimes it's unachievable, and sometimes we do internally a bad job of remembering that we're human beings too. We're, you know, just because we put on a uniform and a piece of tin that says police on it, right? That doesn't make us not human, right?
100%. Like, we're supposed to be perfect.
Right.
Yeah, and for the record, one day I will get my license.
There you go.
To be this. The hell with those attorneys.
You're the first one I'm calling.
We're wordy, bro. Love words. And you know what's interesting to say that is because attorneys are like, you know, so into, like you said, these policies are 10, 12 pages. But I remember when I was in law school, they always tell you less is more. Like, when you write an essay, just, I don't need everything. Just give me basic stuff. And it's so contradicting. What I will say is, in terms of policy, I think as long as we have an umbrella of generalization, if you will, I think we're fine. Because, believe it or not, and this is true for the civilian audience, and even for you young cops or, you know, whoever's watching, listening, you do violate policy. You have to violate policy sometimes. You know, I mean, it's just the way it is. Look, you're supposed to have your taser on your duty belt. Well, you know, I don't know, I'm in the report writing room and I got my belt off, and next you know, a help call calls out. I just happen to grab my taser and I throw it next to me because I got to go. Well, you know, the policy is that you're supposed to keep it on your duty belt, just little stuff like that. And I won't get too much into when you apply force, right? Any use of force, especially with tactics, there's going to be some deviations. And the question is, are those deviations so substantial that you can't justify it? If you can't justify it, then we can jam you up about it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, you know, my story about my IA story is a good example. I mentioned one of the allegations was that I didn't announce to the communication center that I was responding in a Code 3 manner. That's in the policy. I didn't do it. So it's technically a policy violation. However, I made that choice knowingly because in that moment, what I had to say on the radio was not more important than what the officer at the scene who had just been rammed had to say, right? So I knowingly broke policy. Now, the policy does not afford me the exception of, you know, there's no exceptions for what I did, so I still violated. It's just to your point that sometimes we break policy, right? And we used to say policy or guidelines, right?
Yes.
That's not the mentality anymore. The mentality now is the policy is the policy is the policy. And it's kind of the letter of the law versus the spirit, right? So, yeah, that's an example of I knew I broke policy. I still think to this day what he had to say was more important than what I had to say for any number of reasons. So it's just for your civilian audience. So sometimes we do break policy.
Oh, no, 100%. Look, you're not supposed to be on your phone. Well, you know, if I'm getting, I mean, you know, I'm parked. In uniform, and I'm looking at my phone. Could be my wife, or, you know, my kids, or whatever. I got a question for you. 2012. Are the expectations of a police officer greater now than it was 12 years ago?
Infinitely greater. Yeah, infinitely greater.
You think that, let me ask you it this way. Do you think not just the public, but both, the department and the public, expect a lot out of a police officer today?
Oh yeah, and it's just increasing. We are continuing to have things added to our plate, so to speak, in terms of what our responsibilities are out in the public. And I'm not averse to any responsibility. I don't shirk any responsibility for anything. I like having things to do and having things on my plate and all that kind of stuff. But there does come a point where you might ask, like, are the police the right tool for this? You know, are the guys with guns and tasers and handcuffs, and are they always the right tool for what you're calling us to? And we'll always come, right? But that's why nowadays we're becoming a little bit more hesitant to the old, my kid's not listening and he's breaking his Nintendo in the room, go in there and make him stop. It's like, hold on, I'm not sure I'm the best guy to go do that. You might be as the parent or whatever the situation is, but I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent.
No. I totally agree with you. Look, we have been afforded the success that we have with working in a municipal department, because I don't know if you know this or not, but sheriff's departments, they have to serve eviction notices.
I did, yeah.
That's beyond me.
Absolutely.
I would have never thought of doing that, and here you are.
Yeah.
And that situation can escalate.
Oh yeah.
And now here you are. Wait a minute, hold on. So I got to de-escalate. So to your point, I don't think that we are always the ones that should be serving eviction notices.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the civil divisions in any sheriff's office to like comment.
Neither do I, and we're just
having
this
to
conversation.
speak too intelligently. But yeah, I mean, we both probably get the same notifications on our phone when an officer or deputy's been killed in the line of duty, and sometimes it literally says serving an eviction notice.
Yeah.
And I think there are two sides to that coin. One, well, if it wasn't a cop, meaning the person was not armed and able to defend themselves, would it have been worse?
Yeah.
And then
Good point.
that begs the next question, like, man, should it be the police then? Because we are the ones with guns. But it does seem weird that in a strictly civil proceeding, they're the ones to go out and do that.
Yeah. Not to knock any deputy sheriff or any sheriff that's listening or watching. It's just that it goes to the point, and the light bulb hit when you said, is that, are we the entity to be doing such a function? And to me personally, if I was chief for a day, I probably would say no, without knowing, all the, do's and don'ts, duties and responsibilities, and so on and so forth.
To answer your original question on, is too much expected of us?
Yes.
I think technology plays a role now too. We all have body cams, and I got nothing against body cams. They've only helped me personally, honestly, with frivolous complaints and whatnot. But it does give because all the body cams on YouTube now, right?
Yes.
It does give everybody an opportunity to be an expert and to render their opinion, whether it's an expert opinion or not. And when, it's kind of like the telephone game. When I give you a piece of bad information and you go tell your friend a piece of bad information, I mean, now the bad information is circling, right? If we went and put cameras in everybody's private business and we all got to watch everybody do things at their job and not just our job, we'd probably have some inappropriate opinions or just maybe even correct opinions.
100%.
What I'm building up to is just the technology itself has afforded people a window into like a front row seat, quite frankly, since the camera's mounted to our body. You're there with me and you're not seeing exactly what I'm seeing with the camera angle, but you watch what I'm seeing more or less. And that affords you the ability to at least think that you can form your own opinion about what happened.
Or do better.
Sure.
Of course, 100%. Worst incident in your career?
I think the one, like the one that, we're going to get to something in capers, but the one that still sort of bums me out, so to speak, and that's putting it lightly. I don't want to insult the people involved with this case by saying it bums me out. But it is a tough call for me personally. I probably still had about 2 years on, some like graveyard hours, and the communications center gets a call of a jumper. So a mentally distraught person has called the communications center themselves. This person said, I'm 15 years old, and I am at the top of my 9-story building, and I'm going to jump off and myself. And we've all been to, suicide attempts or suicide threats. That's part of the business when you sign up for this job. At the time, I just got into our negotiations team, so like hostage negotiator, also deals with people in crisis, right? So I was the only negotiator on duty, so I knew this. I felt extra responsibility to get there and help, right, and solve this problem. So the dispatch center is keeping the person on the phone, which, man, looking back was probably the right decision, but I wanted to be on the phone, probably a little bit. It's not
Earlier?
I still go back and forth with if it was the right decision for me to tell the communication center, you hang up on him so I can call him. I wanted to be on the phone because I wanted to negotiate.
Yeah.
What I didn't account for is that as soon as there was a break in communication, he might not answer my call.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He chose to call us. I told the communication center, not from a place of like knowingly being arrogant, but there was some of me, and I don't know the right word. It could be arrogance, Marlon, but I thought since I had the negotiator training that what I would say to him would be better or would be more useful for him in that moment, right? So I'm flying down there. I tell them to hang up. Now he's not answering my calls. So now I'm just thinking, man, he jumped.
Right.
And the last thing the dispatcher was saying is, he's telling them, tell my sisters I love them, basically.
Yeah.
So he's getting close. So what makes this call worse than a different suicide call is that as soon as me and my partner in front of me, this guy's now a manager at my first agency, really, really good dude. But when we turned the corner and we were basically at his street, we had a front row seat to him falling. So he wasn't already there when we arrived. We watched him jump. Wow. And I remember thinking like, man, I wish I could have said something. Yeah. And then there's kind of like the, not to be morbid, but like for your civilian audience, like this stuff is like real stuff. The way he bounced.
Yeah.
Right. And he was 15, and I still remember the guy who's a manager now. He was either a corporal or a sergeant at the time. He gets out of the car, and this is a squared away guy, like SWAT guy, just a good leader, a good dude. And the way that he yelled at me to get my med bag, his voice is cracking. Like you can tell that like he was feeling the stress. Like I saw chinks in armor in a guy who I didn't think had chinks in his armor, right? And I was a new guy, right? So I'm like, oh man, if he's kind of screwed up, like, what am I gonna do, right? I barely know what I'm doing, right? I got 2 years on the job. You don't know anything in 2 years.
Yeah, you don't know jack shit.
Exactly. So I get the med bag, and I mean, we go up to the kid, and there's another officer there at this point, and he's a former paramedic, and I mean, we asked him something to the extent is like, hey man, what can we do? And he just goes, you can't do anything for that. Like the kid's. And so then it was just like a few minutes later where I heard this woman wailing, and there's mom at the front door. Somehow figured it out with all the sirens or whatever, that something had happened, and she came out to the front door and saw her 15-year-old on the cement. So for me, I ended up, I don't remember if it was my case, if I was the IO or not, but I ended up going, to see if he left a note on the roof or anything. So we went up there, and you can't help but think when you're up there seeing the last thing, so to speak, right?
Of course.
Man, when his feet left the ledge, what was he thinking?
Yeah.
Did he instantly regret it? Was he at peace with his decision? Yeah. He's only 15-year-old. That's what sucks the most is not just watching him fall and having that unfold in front of your eyes, but so much life left.
Yeah, and the only thing that I can add to that is, as you're telling me this story, maybe perhaps it's something along the lines of that's what police work is.
Yeah.
You have 2 years on, and you probably didn't even know you were going to experience something like this.
Oh yeah, yeah. We it is true when like the old like it's the front row seat to the best movie in the world or whatever that saying is. That's in our career. That's completely true. But sometimes you see things that nobody should see.
Yeah, the worst that God has to offer is the way I put it, and it has an impact on you.
Yeah.
In terms of mental wellness, I mean, 12 years ago, 26 years ago, mental wellness is not at the forefront like it is today. I suppose you not getting there on time is a way of God kind of telling you, hey, Sam, this is what you signed up for. And this is something you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You know, and then again, what's there to learn?
Yeah.
Besides the fact that it really impacts everybody.
Yeah.
And I suppose the next couple of days or, you know, for that matter, weeks, months,
Yeah.
it's just not the same.
Yeah, the partner that I responded with, the guy I keep referring to, if he sees this, he'll know exactly. I mean, we'll both think of the kid's name. I
Yeah.
still remember the kid's name 12 years later, and he will too. It's not something that like has followed me. It's not something I think about.
Correct.
Right, but you know, when I tell the story,
It's the worst incident.
I go back. Right.
Yeah, no, totally.
You know, you might see my eyes looking at like I'm back.
No,
Right.
yeah, totally. I myself also in my days in patrol, I've responded to some suicides in progress, and I haven't had that outcome. But one day in Capers, I'll share mine.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing that because people really need to know what police work really is.
Yeah.
And that's part of it.
Yeah.
So, hey, let's go with something good, man. Give me best achievement, something rewarding in your career thus far.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of a caper story. I know we'll do a better caper later, but it would be easy to go to for your audience, especially because they love a killer story. It'd be easier for me to go to an OIS I was involved with.
Right.
But the thing I'm more proud of is a different case that I had when I was up in my plainclothes assignment doing detective work and working the stolen vehicles, fugitive apprehension, that kind of stuff. We had a sergeant walk into our unit, and I was on call, so he came over to me, and he's like, hey, random, but you know, I worked a case before he was a sergeant. He was a assaults detective, and he says, hey, I had this case like 5-6 years ago. I don't know what happened with it, but I just went to drop my kid off at school, and her teacher is the victim in that case. So it sparked my interest on like, whatever happened to this guy? Because he did some pretty terrible things to this woman and her sister. And so before he walked into our cubicle, he looked up the case, and the guy was wanted. He was out of custody, never came back. They let him out during COVID. He never came back. So he's like, are you interested in getting this guy? And I'm like, well, based on what you've told me, it's like all assault stuff against minors. I'm like, that's all you have to say. Yeah, I want to get this guy. Of course I want to get this guy. I'm not doing anything else until this guy's in custody, right?
There you go.
And so then he's like, hey, here's the case number. And he's like, dude, this is a bad dude. I looked it up. They let him out twice during COVID. Not once, but twice. Cut off his ankle monitor, shocker, right? And never came back. So he's completely in the wind. He's been in the wind for, I think at the time, 2 years.
Wow.
So he has been gone. And so I read the case, and I only got to get like 2 paragraphs in. I mean, I'm not going to share the details with your audience, but
we're sold. I'm sold.
Suffice to say, he did everything under the sun to these poor women.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Everything under the sun. And he has to get got.
Yeah.
So I start looking into this guy. One of the things that I leveraged a lot when I was a detective in this unit was social media. People make a lot of mistakes with their social media and what they do and comment on and all that kind of stuff. So this guy has multiple profiles. He's forgotten his password 10 times, right? So he's got 11 profiles. That's usually what happens. And I'm going through them all. I'm seeing what stuff he's making public. And long story, more boring, none of those have any fruitful leads. Some of them had some phone numbers and stuff like that, but they were all since disconnected. So I ended up just searching his name, like just in a different way. And I got linked to somebody else's profile that tagged him in one of their photos. And so what people don't know, at least at the time, I don't know if Facebook has fixed this, but if you have a profile that says Marlon on it and you decide to change your name to Sam for whatever reason on your profile, everything that you got tagged in as Marlon will stay as Marlon in the tag, right?
Got it.
So I found this profile that was tagged with the actual suspect's name, but on the header of the profile was now a new name, so a different alias, right?
Got it.
So I click on that, and his profile photo was updated 3 days ago. And I'm like, perfect. We have a current profile, right? So I ended up writing paper on that profile, And I got a lead for this guy in the form of a phone number. And in the same paper that I wrote for like the subscriber information on his profile, I also requested to track their account. And people don't realize that if you have a Facebook account, you can real-time track somebody's logins. So you can write like a Facebook tracker warrant for this. And that's not a trade secret, right? Like it's out there, but
Okay.
I think it's just little known.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so you can write a Facebook tracker warrant. So every time this guy logs in, it'll give me an IP address and a general lat long of where he is.
Okay.
So the last login when I got my results on this guy was like out in the Redding area, Redding, California.
Okay.
So north of us, also a good place to hide. A lot of woods out there, right? So in the subscriber info return I got from from Facebook, there was also a phone number that I had not discovered before. So, and because it was a current profile, I felt pretty good about that phone number.
You worked that up?
Yeah, so I went up on the phone, and the phone confirmed that he was out in that area in a town called Shingletown. Shingletown, which I've never heard of, right?
Yeah.
But it's east of Redding. It's even smaller. There's one road basically that goes through it. Tons of places to hide out in the woods. You don't have neighbors for miles type of place. Also some context, like on a more personal level, probably one of my closest friends happened to have lateraled from our agency out to Shasta County, where that is. So I'm calling my buddy, and we're gonna work together again. He was in my unit before he left, so we're doing the same work again. Man, this is a perfect scenario.
That's right.
So I call him up. I'm like, hey, dude, I got a guy. He's hiding out in your neck of the woods. I'm up on his phone. The radius for his phone, like the ping radius, is a quarter mile. So that's not beautiful by any means.
Yeah.
But because it's a tiny little town, there's not a lot of places to be in a quarter mile, right? If I put your phone radius here in a quarter mile, nobody would know where to look for Marlon because there's so much to look for in a quarter mile.
Right.
But we go out to Shingletown, there's 2 buildings, right? We're done.
Perfect.
So we, our unit packed some bags. We're like, we're going out to Shingletown. We're not coming back without this guy. So we team up with the Shasta County DA's office with some of their investigators, including my buddy. And we basically, we go set up surveillance at the 2 buildings that this guy could be. And, DA investigators, God bless them, I love them, but I think they'll even admit to you that their day-to-day work is more like fraud and auto insurance stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they would even agree it's not the sexiest stuff. So now they're just jazzed. They're like, yes, let's go get this guy hiding in our neck of the woods.
Nighttime goggles.
Yeah. And even better, my unit had a suspicion he was going to be at one of these buildings, but we set up a contingency plan to have the DA investigators over at this other building to find this guy. Well, he ends up being at the other building, so the DA investigators find him. We go, we do our thing. I don't know what you guys call it down here, VCTs. We crash into his car in a lawful and tactical way to pin him in. Turns out, so we get the guy in custody, right? And the DA investigator's just like, yes, yes. Probably the most fun he's had in a while. Awesome dude. Eagle Eye is what we call him now. So we get the guy, and he's seated next. He's the passenger in the car, and he's seated next to his girlfriend or wife or fiance, I forget, but long-term relationship. She knows him as a different name. She doesn't even know he's been on the run for years for having done terrible things to young women back in the day. So that's what I'm most proud of. And it's not because I found this guy. It's because he thought he could run out to some small town and hide and not have to answer for his crimes. He thought that justice wouldn't find him, and Eagle Eye at Shasta County found him.
Eagle Eye, man, if you're listening, watching.
Good job.
Good job, bro. Give you props for doing such great, outstanding police work. Thanks for sharing that, man. Okay, look, man, we're almost here at the end. I'm going to leave the floor up to you. Give any advice to anyone who wants to come in the world of law enforcement that's applying, maybe even a young officer like you, over 10 years ago, or someone who's on the job. What kind of advice you have for them, man?
Be a pro. Be a pro. Know as much as you can. Don't accept the level of training, even if it's a high level of training that your agency gives you. That's a finite resource. You can only go back to them so many times and ask to go to a class or ask for this training. They only have so much money or resources they can throw at you, one person of many, depending on how big your agency is. Put yourself through training. Don't give your agency don't be at the mercy of your agency in terms of how far you're going to take your career path, right? And that's not a knock on the agency. Both the agencies I worked for, I would say I was blessed to go to a lot of classes.
Right.
However, there were times where like, sorry, man, we can't swing it, right? Either money, the budget's spent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We're bingo on the budget, or, we got to send so-and-so, their paper came first, right? It's like, okay, well, guess what? I'm taking a vacation day. I'm willing to do that. And I'm buying my way into the class. I'm going anyways, right? It's a class I want to go to. So be a pro, understand the policy manual. Policies aren't just there to get you, but they're there to protect you as well, right? That's important if I put my POA hat on for a moment, right?
Of course.
It's important to know the constraints that you work within, what you can do and what you can't do, and that's all contained in the policy manual, right? Pay attention to case law. Just never, ever, ever stop learning.
Yeah. Peace Officers Bill of Rights.
Yes. Massively important.
Yeah.
Not the most thrilling read, but
It's horrible.
there is a, I forget if it's like the 15th edition or so, they just keep coming out with editions and whatnot, but it's not thrilling by any means, but is it worth your time? Absolutely, it's worth your time.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you meant to say is not just training, but to go to Savage Training Group.
Yes, I did.
And take courses because, Savage Training Group offers top of the line, top notch training. I'm a little biased, I suppose, because I do teach the internal affairs officer involved shooting investigation course. So, hey, look, Sam, you know what? I really appreciate you taking the time to come by, get to know you, tell a story in which I'm certain that we all got some lessons learned and some takeaways. So I appreciate it, man.
Well, I hope so, and thanks again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Hey, so show me clear. We are done, and always, please be safe out there, and don't forget to go Code 6. Thank you.